"She made me promise to find you," he said, and the words fell in a strange hush between them. Strange because they made a future where there had been only the ache of the past. Ara's laugh came out small and disbelieving. "Find me?" "In her letters," John said. "She wrote about you, about the night you almost—" He stopped, choosing the gentlest of terms. "She told me not to make a fuss, that you wouldn't want it. She wanted only that whoever cared for you most would be cared for in return." Ara thought of the single card in her tote, the note of thanks, the way Lily would slip her a $10 bill and say, "Go buy Maisie a book." She thought of the night when the lights in the ward had gone out because the power had failed, and Lily hummed until Ara's breath found its rhythm again. She had not expected recognition. She had expected to be one more small grief at a burial service, and then the slow, necessary work of returning to a life that was still short on money and long on responsibility. "You don't have to," Ara began, meaning to refuse anything more than the silent gratitude she carried in her chest. John's voice interrupted her, not with insistence, but with a softness that matched his expression. She was insistent, in a way she could be. She said, "If I have any hush left in me, I will use it to help the ones who were gentle to me." That was Lily, quiet as a candle. He looked at the headstone, then back at her. She left instructions. Part of what she wanted was for me to continue quietly, no announcements, until I couldn't do quiet anymore. There it was, the lean toward truth. It trembled in the open air like something both dangerous and freeing. People in the small crowd shifted, a low murmur like distant surf. Ara thought of small houses and night shifts, of Maisie's small hands with their permanent speck of glue, and felt the muscle of her jaw loosen in a way she hadn't expected. John watched her, seeing more than the surface of the moment. He noticed the callus at the base of her thumb, the way her coat hung from one shoulder as if it were too heavy to keep in place. He had become adept in reading small ruptures into the lives of others. Grief made a map on faces and hands, and in Lily's absence he had learned to read the lines she had once traced for him. "She told me to look for you at her graveside, if I could," he said. "I thought I might find you here." Ara lowered her eyes. The canvas tote, the single card, the worn coat, none of it matched the scale of whatever Lily had made happen. The word that hung unspoken between them was money, and with it came 1,000 threads, charity and shame, dependence and dignity. Ara had never wanted to be a story anyone told to feel better about themselves. She had wanted to work, to provide, to hold Maisie steady. She had wanted to be enough. "What does she want?" she asked, brittle with the caution she had learned from need. John hesitated, then spoke as if reciting something that had been written and rewritten in his mind all night. "Lily arranged for a fund to be used for the people she cared for, practical things, housing when it's tenuous, enough to keep a roof for a time, education for children, the kind of small repairs that keep a life steady." He swallowed. "She asked me to give it to those who needed it most, and to do it quietly. She named you." The bouquet slipped from his fingers in the moment, landing in the grass with a soft, muffled sound. In the silence, even the birds contained their calls. Ara pressed the paper card to her chest, the only anchor she had. She felt as if the ground had shifted and showed her both the abyss and the path across it. "You're wealthy?" a voice cut in, thin and edged. Celeste stepped forward as if drawn by instinct. She had the high, precise face of someone who had learned to contain feeling in rules and expression. She had the look of a person who believed that grief should be ordered and protected. "John, what are you doing? Lily would not have wanted." Celeste's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who believed guardianship over a memory meant stewardship of how that memory would be preserved. The implication, of course, was that Lily's memory should be kept within family bounds, not spent on strangers. John straightened in a way that betrayed the calculation he had rehearsed. "She did this," he said simply. "She chose to use her resources the way she wanted. Lily gave to people who had been kind to her. That was her choice." Celeste's jaw worked. "She was fragile the last months. Her sentence broke. Grief, she had found, made even determined people stumble. You can't hand a stranger a check and call it justice." Ara watched them, feeling suddenly too exposed. She imagined the word million floated like a headline around John, a figure that had the power to shame as easily redeem. She did not know how to accept help that arrived labeled as charity by a woman whose sister had found her at the edge of something dark. And yet the ache in her chest shifted, not because the prospect of money offered a magic cure, but because the possibility of a different future opened like a door. Later, when the crowd thinned and Celeste stood to the side with a face made of brittle restraint, John offered Ara a small envelope. "This is not everything," he said, "but it's a start. Lily told me to bring it." Ara weighed the envelope in her hand like contraband, fingers folding over the edge. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to be the woman who could say no and keep her pride intact. But Maisie's name on the back of her mind, the small, sticky hands that would soon be reaching for crayons, asked another kind of question. Practicality had always been Ara's religion. "If I take this," she said finally, "I work for it. I don't take it as a handout." John nodded. That was always her wish. Dignity first. The first days after the graveside were staccato and strange. John arranged for a small cottage on the edge of the Grants' property, a guest house Lily had liked for its light and the way the pines leaned to the north. It had been kept as a spare in a life that expected guests and never expected how few would come. Ara and Maisie moved in with only what fit in a rented pickup and a few plastic bins. The rest she kept in a storage locker, because letting more into the cottage felt like inviting judgment through an unlocked door. The cottage smelled of faint lavender and old books. The kitchen had a kettle that whistled with a high, delighted tone, and a little table where Maisie insisted on placing every single crayon she owned in a strict line. The first night, Maisie fell asleep with a crayon still clutched in the shape of an accidental sword, her cheeks flushed from exertion and the bloom of a simple, unforced joy. Ara woke in the middle of the night and stood in the hallway listening to the house's quiet. An old grandfather clock that Lily's hands had kept in working order, the hush of wind through the eaves, and felt the heavy, disorienting sense of being given more than she had asked for. She brewed tea in a chipped mug Lily had left in a drawer, and for a long time watched steam draw slow patterns in the dim light. The foundation Lily had arranged turned out to be more than a fund. It had a small staff, a mission statement written in Lily's neat, unshowy script, to tend to the small ruptures in people's lives so they might continue. John had established a board, kept an accounting that made sense to lawyers and to people who read numbers like prayers. Lily, it appeared, had been their North Star. When Ara went in for an interview, more a conversation, she met Mara, the woman who ran the foundation's outreach. Mara had hair the color of pewter, and hands that moved like someone used to touch, correct, gather. She asked Ara about skills, and Ara told the truth. Caregiving, making ends meet, coaxing children into sleep, being present in the night. Mara smiled as if she had been waiting for those answers. "We need steady hands," she said, "and steady hearts. There are so many small fixes we need to make." Ara began part-time work, managing practical responses, rent assistance in emergencies, arranging home visits, overseeing the pantry Lily had insisted they stock. She learned the ledger, the way numbers could be a promise rather than a wall. Maisie came to the office sometimes, trailing crayons and confidence. The foundation's garden, Lily had loved tending it, became a place where Maisie first learned to plant a seed. Ara discovered the quiet joy of watching a child press a seed into the dark and cover it with an implausible faith. John came by less often at first. He moved through days like a man trying on new suits that never fit. Grief was a fabric that could not be tailored.
"So, you made it public. You, John Grant, millionaire, as some would have you. What are you doing with the name Lily Grant?" The word millionaire landed, as if someone had raised the volume on a radio that had been whispering. Ara felt it like a hand at the back of the neck, a sudden clarity that people's reactions to her would now be filtered through the scale of what John could provide. She had always thought of money as something that asked for a kind of gratitude that could be humiliating. She did not want gratitude. She wanted work. "What John is doing is honoring Lily's final wishes," Mara said. "It's not about a headline. It's about a practice, one that closes small gaps." Celeste stepped back then, as if hit with the measure of what had been decided. Her grief settled into resentment and fear. "You will not erase her," she said to John. "You will not let her name become a poster for what the forgotten cost." John took a breath that seemed to steady him. "Lily's name needs to be a shelter for what we've lost," he said, "not a shrine. She hated shrines." The fight could have made Ara small. Instead, it lit something steady in her, the sense that she had a right to claim a life that was not merely subsistence. She turned toward Celeste because she had, for all her wariness, learned to hold truth in a way that didn't require permission. "I don't want your pity," Ara said plainly. "I want to be useful. Lily believed in small acts. I want to be part of that." Celeste looked at her then with the uncertainty of someone whose map had been redrawn. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across her face. She saw a woman who had been rescued and had chosen to keep living, not in repayment, but in response. The hardness in Celeste's shoulders eased, almost imperceptibly. The weeks that followed were less dramatic than Ara had imagined. People adjusted their gossip as it fit their convenience. Some were wary, some were curious, some came to the foundation when they needed help and found it was not a place of charity so much as a bureaucracy of care. Ara worked hard. She rose earlier than she had for months, determined to become the kind of person who could be entrusted with both keys and responsibility. Maisie, with the untroubled appetite of small children for novelty, declared the garden theirs and took to pulling at the weeds with fervor. She would come home with dirt smudged under her nails and a grin that erased the nightly calculations in Ara's mind. Part of the arrangement with John and the foundation was that Ara would document the small fixes, notes, receipts, photographs, so that future committees could see the practical evidence of Lily's wish. She learned to write grant proposals that were honest and spare, to speak in a voice that said, "This is what we need, and this is what we will do."
In doing so, she discovered a capacity in herself she had not given room to grow, the ability to argue for people as if their survival were her own moral work. She learned to listen in a way that let rooms breathe. Not everything improved in a straight line. There were nights when Ara's chest tightened and the old blue-black cavern opened its mouth. She sometimes woke in the dark with a hand under her own ribs and remembered the night she had taken pills in a bathtub. The plastic bottle clattered at the bottom of the cabinet like an accusation. She did not speak of that to John or to Mara in the beginning. But small things, the way Lily's note smelled of leaven, the way Maisie's head fit against her shoulder when she read a bedtime story, kept her tethered to a life she was choosing. John, for his part, began to appear more often in ordinary ways. He would hand Ara a mug of coffee as she arrived early to check the day's schedule, sit quietly in the back of meetings, listening as if learning to hear again. He took up the garden with a quiet precision, kneeling in the soil with hands used to different kinds of labor. Sometimes he would stand just beyond the kitchen where Ara worked and watch Maisie make mud pies, and a small, private smile would cross his face. It was in those small, ordinary observations that the real change took place. Then came the afternoon that carved the town into before and after. It started with a bus route, a low, yellow stop near the market where people caught lifts to jobs and chewed the corners of their sandwiches. Ara had gone to the stop to return a sweater to a friend, and Maisie had been at preschool. She moved through her morning with a list and the easy hum of tasks. When she reached the stop, she found John standing there with a small duffel at his feet, and a look that belonged to someone who had decided something months in advance, and then finally acted. She had never seen John so exposed to the world. He looked in that moment like a man standing on a cliff, deciding whether to step back or go forward. His face was clearer than she had ever seen it. Grief had been sanded away and replaced with a stubborn, unexpected tenderness. "You took a long time," she said, "because common talk fills the thin air between decisions." John's laugh surprised her. It was a small sound, not a guffaw, but a release. "I was afraid," he admitted, "afraid of what it would mean to live in this house without her, afraid of the silence." "And?" Ara asked. "And I realized living with silence wasn't what she would have wanted," he said. He reached for the duffel, slung it over his shoulder, and for a moment Maisie appeared, clinging to Ara's hand, her eyes wide at the sight of the stranger who had come to be known as John's friend. "I am moving into the cottage," John said, as if the words were both a confession and a promise. "I want the house to be a home again. I want Lily's things to be used." For a long time, she had lived by either carrying everything or being accused of not caring enough. "I know," she said, "but some things are mine." "And you don't have to be ashamed of that," he replied. He did not offer to fix what could not be fixed. He simply sat beside her until the tea cooled and Maisie shifted in her sleep like a small, living argument for tenderness. In such moments, their relationship settled into its true rhythm, Not rescuer and rescued, but two people learning to be gentle to each other's damaged places. Ara began to see that help could be a woven thing. Threads of practical support, threads of human companionship. Ties that neither reduced her nor inflated his virtue. They were becoming a family, not because a legal instrument had said so, but because of small decisions made in ordinary spaces. The foundation continued its work, too. There were times when the local paper would run a small story about the Grants Foundation and the cottage, and people would take sides and then forget to take sides when the pantry ran low and they needed someone to help. The grants that Lily had established were not financial miracles, but like slow rain, they softened the ground. People put down roots. Maisie started preschool with a new backpack and a lunch that sometimes contained a note Lily had written in a hand that was still impossible to imagine being absent. She drew pictures of houses with 3 stick figures and a wind chime hanging over the front porch. Ara taped these to the fridge and felt a swell of something like peace. The town's sense that the Grants had performed a spectacle had begun to fade into something quieter. Appreciation for the fact that their little safety net existed. People came to the foundation with mundane needs and went away with something practical. The woman who had been refused a heater in winter received one. The teenager who needed a bus pass for a job received it without explanation. The secret that Lily had left, her instructions that kindness be both private and sustained, was kept to the degree that it could be kept. John had chosen to make it real. In the garden that Lily had loved, they hung a wind chime that sang low and steady in the evening breeze. Ara found herself listening to it in the morning as Maisie tied her shoes, and at night, when the darkness pressed the windows, the chime would sound like a small promise. It reminded Ara of Lily's hands, of the way she had once straightened a blanket over her shoulders and said, without grand words, that life could be tended. The crisis that might have undone them came not as a dramatic accusation, but as an accumulation of old fears. Celeste, in a rare moment of candor, admitted that she had feared Lily's kindness would be used as a justification to overwrite the life she had shared with her sister. "I wanted to keep her memory," she said, voice cracked, "to make a place where it was safe." Ears softened names and sharpened memory. Children who had once shuffled at the edge of the foundation grew into adults who returned with partners and babies. People left, then came back because the town had a way of pulling its own, like a net drawn through the waters. A woman who had been helped in Lily's first year of service opened a small shop down the road and painted a sign that read simply, "Thanks." She sold useful things, thread, enamel mugs, lemon curd. She gave a discount to anyone who carried a canned jar from Lily's pantry and a full measure of respect to anyone who asked for work. Maisie became, in slow increments, the face of a new generation that had known Lily only by story and by the tangible things she left. She apprenticed with Celeste for months on end, learning to stir jam when the temperature told you it was ready, to know by smell when a preserve had shifted from sweet to sacred. She took to the garden as if she'd carried it in her bones. Rows of beans, a small hedge of herbs, a plot for children to learn that things could be tended and would, with care, answer. Once, a visitor asked Maisie what made the foundation different from other charities she had read about. Maisie thought, then pointed to a jar of plum jam on the shelf, then to a photo of Lily that hung by the register, an ordinary woman in a sun hat, laughing, and finally to the children drawing suns that looked like coins and warmth. "We do the small things," she said. "We keep our promises to each other. We remember who we're doing it for." It sounded too simple, and yet everyone who heard it felt a small shift, as if a weight had been taken off. Time, as it tends to do, rearranged the house. Celeste's hands grew more precise and quieter. She taught Maisie to wrap jars in brown paper with a practiced tuck. Ara began to take fewer long walks alone, but when she went, she came back with stories of old neighbors and patches of wildflowers. When she grew older still, she sat often on the front steps with a blanket over her knees and watched the town move like a slow river. Sometimes children climbed into her lap and called out for jam. She would look at them as if seeing Lily and John and Celeste all braided together, and she would tell them about the importance of keeping the kettle on for anyone who knocked. On a bright morning that smelled of cut grass and sun-warmed earth, Maisie climbed the little hill behind the cottage. She carried an old wind chime she had found in a box in the attic. Its metal dulled, but whole, the notes it made when the breeze touched it sweet and familiar. She hung it from the same beam where Lily had once hung one, then stepped back and let the town's air move through it. The sound caught them all by surprise, a thin, clear bell that seemed to remember the very first day it had sung. A pair of children ran up breathless, and Maisie knelt to show them how to tie a knot so the chime would not slip. "This is Lily's sound."